Water Show, 8 to 10 a.m. And you're listening to
So we've thrown up pictures that you can see visually of the Hagia Sophia Mosque in Istanbul in Turkey. It is well, world renowned, of course, but there's a fascinating story of that mosque, which is very different to maybe many of the other mosques in inverted commas, and because it's been church, it's been mosque, it's been museum, it's been mosque. There's a whole lot of stories around that, but also there's a magnificence of the structure. So let's find out more about it with my guest from the IDDEF, and that's the organization, and that's Omer Hasçiçek. Omer, I appreciate your time. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm very happy to be here again.
Thank you so much. Right. So tell me more. I mean, first of all, how significant is the Hagia Sophia mosque or establishment building, to the people of Turkey and maybe, in your opinion, around the world?
Hagia Sophia, my brother, is when I was young, I didn't grow up in Turkey, and for me, the Hagia Sophia, living in America, was this weird symbol that I couldn't imagine. And when I saw it for the first time, that idea in me I saw was very justified. The Hagia Sophia is very, very significant for Muslims in Turkey. I think for Muslims all around the world, because the Hagia Sophia is one of the, I guess you could say, the marker point of the success of Islam, really, in a way.
So a symbol of the Islamic presence, because prior to that there wasn't.
Yes.
Explain for those that don't know the backstory to that, and why it's so important. Yeah.
The Hagia Sophia is genuinely ancient. It was the current structure we have today was built in the 5th century by Byzantine Emperor, I think Justinius II. Previously, before that, there were other churches that were built in that same area, but they were either demolished due to natural disaster, or one was demolished due to rioting in Byzantine. The Hagia Sophia, at that point in time, served as a very important crux for the Byzantine Empire. One thing we forget about the Byzantine Empire is that for the longest time in the world, the Byzantines were the last outpost of ancient Rome. For all intents and purposes, Byzantines consider themselves Romans, and for the rest of Christendom, Byzantium, Istanbul, Constantinople was Rome. It was the last outpost of that great civilization they once knew, that once ruled the entirety of Europe, right? So for the Christian world, Constantinople and the Hagia Sophia was this immense kind of gathering point, perhaps, on par, or back then at least, more important than the Vatican is today. It has a very long storied history in Byzantine politics, to the point where it's almost kind of it's distasteful how they've treated it. You hear about how they've, people who rebelled against the emperor used that as a base of operations. They put soldiers in it, or crusaders when they would pass by Constantinople to go to Jerusalem. At least on 2 or 3 occasions, they've actually looted the Hagia Sophia, right? It used to be the seat of the patriarch of the Orthodox faith, and lots of saints have come and gone. Lots of important theological Christian discussions were settled there. For Christendom, it was the church for the very long time.
And then what happened?
And then what happened is Turks came along, as we usually do. With the Ottomans spreading in Anatolia, Constantinople was always that one jewel they were going after. In fact, it was called the red apple. In Turkish, we have this concept. It's more philosophical than anything right now. We call it Kızıl Elma. It's this unattainable kind of goal, conquest we've always desired. And that's based off of a statue of Justinius I or the second in front of Hagia Sophia. It doesn't exist anymore, but there was a statue in which he was horsebound, and there's this one symbol of Christian kingdoms. If you ever see it, it's kind of like this globe with a cross on top. He had that in his hand pointing towards the east. They say based off of that apple. Well, it was called an apple by foreign visitors, despite it being a globe, and that became a symbol for the Ottoman Turks to get to that point, to bring Islam there, to bring the light of Islam and the name of Islam, and to honestly announce the supremacy of Islam in that place.
Okay, so without going down the history, so that happened. Muslims effectively then ran the place as the beginning of the Ottoman Empire, and it's been like that. Well, although it's not the Ottoman Empire anymore, there's a predominantly Muslim presence in Turkey. How did that change then in terms of the Hagia Sophia Church into what happens next? And there's been a couple other things since then. Yeah.
The change happens as such. First of all, the patriarch is moved from the Hagia Sophia to another church. That church, it doesn't exist anymore. It used to be in the place where the Fatih Mosque is. It was moved there, and then from there, it was moved to what we have. It's called the Fethiye Church. It's currently a mosque as well. It was moved there. So the patriarchy itself, all the priests with all the icons and everything were moved there. So the building was actually vacated in that sense, with it being converted into a mosque. A minaret was put into place. The mosaics and murals internally were covered in plaster, which effectively preserved all those things to that day. A mihrab and a minbar were added. So functionally, whatever was needed to make it a mosque was added. And also in the 16th century, at least the last reported sighting of the floor of the church was in the 16th century. After that, it was carpeted. So it was a functional shift, and the most important thing is it was the imperial mosque. It was the Hagia Sophia Jami Kibiri. It was the mosque of the empire. So the highest Majlis of Fatwa happened there, and the Sultan, when he would come for visitations to the people, that's where he would go, and the Topkapı Palace is right next to it.
Okay, and then around what, 1920 or just beyond, the Ottoman Empire collapsed and things changed, and then what happened next?
The 1920s in Turkey, I think, historically, in the next century, we're going to start talking about it the same way we talk about Mao Zedong and his cultural revolutions. There was this very severe, very harsh kind of cultural movement, I would call it a repression, where in this desire to become amongst the cadre of civilized European world nations, the administration of that Turkish government took upon this policy of, I would call it, un-Islamifying Turkey. They removed lots of those symbols of Islam. For a very long time in Turkey, the adhan was read in Turkish, not in Arabic. Teaching Arabic was forbidden. And one of the most important symbols was the Hagia Sophia. It was closed down. It was made into a museum. I personally am of the opinion that this was one thing that was demanded of Turkey by foreign powers after the occupation. Because it was always a very important place for Christendom. I think that was something that was demanded upon them in a political sense, but it was also a blow to Muslims, because for us, seeing that no longer operating as a church was honestly, I could comfortably say it was like a scar on our souls. There was this crack in our hearts knowing that place was no longer a mosque.
Yeah, okay. And then now, just recently, after whatever 60, 70, maybe 80 years as a museum, things changed. And when I was in Turkey twice, and recently about 3 years ago maybe, and it was still a museum.
Yes.
Subsequently, things changed. What's happened then now?
It was converted in the 2020s. In 2020, so it was converted from a mosque into a museum by a congressional decision. That decision was overturned by a cabinet of ministers. So that's a political process that it went through. After that, it was reopened as a mosque. So it was, an imam was appointed to it. It was, carpeted once again. Some of the internal structure. So for a long time, there was this internal scaffolding that was there that was used for renovations. That scaffolding sat there for so long that it technically, in terms of Turkish life, became a historical artifact. Even removing the scaffolding was a political tribulation. After that point, alhamdulillah, seeing as the Hagia Sophia has always been this kind of political focus for a lot of people. For a lot of people with more Islamic sensibilities in Turkey, the Hagia Sophia has always been this desired outcome. And I guess finally, alhamdulillah, the necessary political will came about, and the necessary desire on behalf of the people came about, and people's dreams were granted. Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted the dua of millions of Turkish people everywhere. And that last break in our heart was mended, and alhamdulillah, was shifted from a museum back into a mosque. Alhamdulillah.
And you say that that reflected the wish of millions of Turks, although
Definitely.
as you have already identified, the majority of Turks are the vast majority of the Muslim faith, but it's largely a pretty secular society these days, right? And they still wanted that museum to be converted back into a mosque.
So the awkward thing about secularism and faith and Turks currently is societally and politically, I would say there is this I think what we call being secular and what we call being more Muslim, those are kind of the opposite extremes. There aren't many people who are very secular in the sense that they are diehard faith and church, church and state should be separate, very insistent on secular ideals. And there aren't so many people who are 100%, Islam should be the deciding factor for everything. What we have in Turkey is we have this middle ground of people who identify as Muslims. And if you say they weren't Muslim, they'd be incredibly offended by it. Mind you, maybe they don't pray as much, everybody, and maybe they don't practice as much. But for them, perhaps Islam is a very important cultural symbol. At least it's not only their faith, but it's a part of their identity, right? So even though they may not like the idea of an Islamic law being appointed, for them, the symbolism and the meaning of faith is very important. So for a thing like Hagia Sophia, even more secular-minded Turks would desire for it to return to what it is, because it's also a cultural thing. It's a symbol of where our forefathers came, and for that to be taken away from us is not something that many people can swallow easily.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, I want to find out then about, since the change back to a working, a functional mosque or masjid, what has then changed in terms of the practicalities of it all? And then we'll talk about the construction of the physical edifice of that mosque. We'll do that right after this.
The practicalities of it, okay. We're going on commercial break?
No, we'll do that right after this. Thank you.
Okay.
Conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach and other amenities, your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
This Ramadan, spread the winds of generosity across the world with the Al Imdad Foundation. Sponsor a food hamper for just 800 Rand and help us deliver essential food aid supplies to struggling families across 40 countries globally. Let's feed the fasting this Ramadan. Donate online at alimdad.com or call 0861 786 243 for more information.
Are you looking to distribute your zakah? SANZAF is dedicated to using your zakah, sadaqah, lila, and fitra to bring relief and development to families in need. By donating to SANZAF, you can support our ongoing efforts to provide financial and material assistance to those in need. Let us distribute your zakah and make a difference in the lives of those less fortunate. For more information on how you can donate, visit our website at sanzaf.org.za or call us at 011 834 6046. SANZAF, changing lives through development and relief.
At Sentio, our Invest for Good philosophy is based on a genuine desire to use our investment skills for the benefit of broader society by investing responsibly, giving charitably, and developing talent that will transform the investment industry. Visit www.sentio-capital.com for more information about our Sharia investment products and start saving with us today. Sentio Capital. Invest for good. Sentio Capital Management is an authorized financial services provider.
Online schooling? Why not? Kurtuba Online Academy is the leading global online Islamic school from grade R to matric, offering South African caps and international syllabus. And it doesn't stop there. We also offer online madrasa for every grade. For more information, visit www.kurtubaonline.co.za. Kurtuba Online Academy, the leading global online Islamic school.
You are listening to Salam Media live from our headquarters in South Africa. This is Salam Media, keeping you company this Ramadan.
My guest is Omer Hasçiçek. We're talking about the Hagia Sophia Grand Mosque. Hagia Sophia depends how you pronounce it in Turkey and Istanbul. And yeah, we've been talking about that history, but let's move on then to, so okay, now that it's a functioning mosque or masjid in the last couple of years, how have things changed in terms of the practical usage of that place?
I would say, as I remember it, previously, in years past, when I would walk around that area, the lines to enter the Hagia Sophia Museum weren't particularly long. They're pretty short. Now, the line snakes all the way from the Hagia Sophia almost to the entrance of the Topkapı Palace. So I would say it's generally garnered much more interest from people because now Muslims all over Turkey who dreamed about seeing it as a mosque and praying in it now actually have that opportunity. The practicality of its service is the area it's within is a touristic area, so it doesn't have many residents around it who would go to and from prayer regularly. But during prayers, at least I would say a fourth or a third of the mosque is filled. And the image you're showing right now, the Hagia Sophia, that's currently what it looks like inside during prayers. There are some coverings over the mosaics. They've towards the so in the direction of the minbar, I'm sorry, the mihrab, upwards there are mosaics of Isa alayhi salam and Maryam alayhi salam, and those are covered with a covering, as in they just moved the cloth over it. And the one thing about the Hagia Sophia is images don't do it justice. When you're inside, it genuinely feels like an otherworldly place. It feels like an image of heaven. In fact, there's a story about that. The Kievan Rus, so one of the first Slavic principalities that essentially formed in time the base of modern day Russia. In the 11th century, they were still pagan. One of the rulers sent out emissaries to learn about Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And when his emissaries came to Constantinople and introduced themselves, they were taken as guests and they were taken to the Hagia Sophia. When they returned, they told their prince that when we came to the Christians, they hosted us in this place and we ate in this place and we weren't sure if we were in heaven or if we were on earth. Hagia Sophia genuinely had this otherworldly air. And Alhamdulillah, it still maintains the same exact thing even today as a mosque. It's just, it has this energy to it. It's beautiful, mashallah. It's genuinely beautiful. And Alhamdulillah, practically speaking, it serves as a visiting point for probably tens of thousands of people at any given day, Muslims and non-Muslims. Previously, it was just tourists that would come there. For Muslims, they didn't have too much interest in it. But now, alhamdulillah, it serves as that spiritual heart.
Mm-hmm. But so to confirm then, I mean, and I've certainly seen those images that you spoke about, Jesus or Nabi Isa and Maryam, as they were removing the coverings from those walls so that one can see it again with those scaffoldings. But are you saying it's covered now permanently once again?
No.
Or what?
No. What they have is they've mounted curtains. They've hung up curtains over it. So you have to it's not physically covered by anything, by plaster. The images are still there. And if you were to take the curtain down, you can see them. But most of the faces and that such isn't visible from the ground. You have to kind of shift yourself and kind of try and look around the cover from different angles.
Okay. So those curtains, if I can call it, they're not open daily then any longer.
No, they're not. I mean, it's used as a mosque. I don't think it would be appropriate to have a face of anybody in the direction of.
All right. So now, I mean, that has resulted in an increase of worshippers, of people of the Muslim faith coming there. has it then resulted in a drop-off of Christians, particularly Orthodox Christians and people linked to the Byzantine Empire, in terms of their own nostalgia? Has that been a drop-off?
One thing I've noticed is the line of people that are queued up there. It's a mixed line. I would say there previously, if there were just tourists, who I would assume were a mixture of Christians and non-Christians, now there's a 60-40 mix of Christians and Muslims. And I think the overall number has increased as well. Previously, you had to pay to enter because it was a museum, and the payment was pretty hefty. It's like a few hundred lira. It was ridiculous, to be honest. But now that it's a mosque, entry is free as well. And I would say, I don't think the amount, ratio-wise, maybe there's more Muslims now, but I think the overall number of Christian visitors has also increased. But
Yeah,
then again, I'm not
yeah.
a curator of admissions.
I understand that. Yeah. Just the last thing. What can you tell us about the actual edifice? I mean, including that the dome, and I mean the historic aspects of the actual structure from day one.
And brother, it's ancient. That building is genuinely ancient. Like the current structure we see as of right now was built in the 5th century. There's been additions. For instance, the minarets you can see, those have been added on later on. But other than that, it's been strengthened a few times. The inside of it is in a good condition. The outside of it, I think, could do with a restoration. But with buildings like this, I mean, the building techniques were so different back then, and the peculiarities of its construction, because at the time it was built, that dome was the largest freestanding dome in the world for a very, very long time. In fact, it wasn't calculated the best, and that was a long problem. So in terms of, I don't know if there's any restoration plans in mind. I mean, it would be wonderful, because at one point, historical records say that rather than this muddy red color, it had this golden sheen on the outside and such. So if there's any kind of restoration plan in mind, I don't actually know. It would be nice, but I think it's such kind of a sensitive heritage site that any attempt to restore it would inadvertently diminish, in the sense that it would physically remove the history, the actual historical elements to it. So in that regard, I don't know what's the situation, but on the inside is just as beautiful as it was. The inside of the mosque, if you were to visit it right now, the inside of it is a result of a restoration done in the 1800s. So in those pictures where you see those large tablets with the names of Subhanahu wa Ta'ala and the Prophet Muhammad and the Rashidun, that was put up there in the 1800s. And the chandeliers, those were in the 1800s. And the columns, those were redone, as in they were, I think, refurbished in the 1800s. So all that happened in the 1800s. But the outside of it hasn't really been touched on. The building itself, the structure itself, is nigh on 1,500 years old. Now that it's standing good, during the time of the Ottomans, they put on many additions that supported the structure. The minarets serves as anchors for the structure that help keep it uptight, up front. And in that sense, there's a lot of that. After it was turned into a museum, there were excavations that were done, and those excavations are still there, as in they haven't filled them in, and you can still see the columns and arches and stuff they pulled out of those excavations. In terms of this actual edifice, the building itself, that it's in, it probably could be in better condition, but as I said, it's such a sensitive kind of side of heritage and culture that you're kind of afraid to touch it. Like, your grandma had this really nice glass duck, and you wanted to touch it, but there's all that risk you may drop it. And
perhaps just the last thing, Omar, before I let you go, I was explaining, of course, I made the point that I've been there, so I know, and I was explaining to some of the other people here that the distance between the Hagia Sophia mosque, right, and what we call the Blue Mosque, is
minimal,
far less than you'd imagine. It's like they're sharing one common garden, right? Why was that the case?
So the Hagia Sophia was initially, it was the Imperial Mosque. It was the Jami Kebir. They wanted a new one, I guess, brother. I don't exactly know what was the thought process behind making the Sultanate right next to it. But once the Sultanate was constructed, that took the place as the Jami Kebir. So that became, I guess you could say, the Imperial Mosque. That became the central mosque. Why were they done side by side? The area itself is right next to the Topkapı Palace, so it's right next to the seat of Ottoman power. right? The palace that actually ruled the Ottoman Empire is genuinely within like 100 meters distance. It's a walking distance. So that has significance. That area itself was the old seat of power of the Byzantine Empire. All the palaces, in fact, if you remember, you remember Sultan Ahmet? And next to it, there's this very wide, kind of broad, I wouldn't say courtyard, but it looks like this thoroughfare where there are these old columns.
Yeah.
And there's this one obelisk. For instance, that was the old hippodrome.
Yes, I certainly remember that. Yeah.
Some of you may remember there was that one movie, Ben-Hur, about that one chariot race. That was the place. That's where that actually historically took place. So it's always been this very significant place, even in Byzantine times.
Well, that area is steeped in history, and we certainly know that, don't we all, right? Omar, let me leave you with that. Thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating talking to you once again, and appreciate the insights that you shared, particularly around the Hagia Sophia, but also just the Hagia Sophia in the context of the Ottoman on the Ottoman Empire and the Sultans at the time. Thank you so much, and inshallah, I wish you well over the last day or so of Ramadan, and well for the day of Eid as well. But of course, you Turks have a very Turkish name for Eid. Like, what do you call it? Hey?
Bayram.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's the word.
Bayram. Yeah,
it's probably some it's probably some sort of Persian, brother.
Yeah. Appreciate your time. Salaam alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Thank you. There we are. Fascinating indeed. In that feature called the Mosques of the World. Right. We're going to get fired up with Ashraf Gangrikar right after this.